Why hello there, Brent here with Bring Your Own Tools. On today's episode, we're completely making over this entire deck and turning it from this to this. We'll keep on watching. Let it start in.
In last week's video, I took on the complete demolition of the existing deck and refurbished all the structural framing, which I'll leave a link for in the description box below. But now let's get to decking.
Our decking is here and I'm ready to get it installed. This is from Timbertech and this is their Landmark Collection Castlegate color. This is a 6-inch wide boards and it's a perfect, beautiful complement to this entire deck. There's so many items that I want to discuss, but we will discuss that later on in the video as to why you want to go with this product, because there are numerous benefits with it. So let's get to installing.
When working with this product, I do highly suggest cutting off the factory edge of any board because I want to make sure I have a perfectly crisp line. But before we install any decking, I want to get to the fascia. Now these fascia boards are only a 1/2 inch thick and they go around the perimeter of our rim joists. However, I want to make sure that there's an overhang and therefore I take a couple small pieces of the fascia and drill them in place in specific areas because I want to make sure that we have the appropriate thickness accounted for. You don't have to do this step, but I find it makes it a lot easier to determine exactly where our picture frame decking boards need to go. And speaking of decking, let's get right to it. I determined the length of the first board I need to cut and then cut a mitered corner. Now this is a 45-degree miter, which I find provides the best look possible for a 90-degree deck corner. I burn a 1/4 inch off of the original measurement that I took and make sure I have a perfectly crisp 90-degree cut at that location. Now let's get this first board installed. I tuck the decking underneath the existing siding and then make sure everything is lined up at the very end of our deck. I use my speed square to make sure everything's lined up with those fascia pieces that I already previously installed and then secure the board in place. Those small pieces of fascia really do help with alignment, and once we have alignment taken care of, you just make sure that it's secured properly every 6 inches. Every 6 inches may sound like a lot, and it is. However, this is just for the perimeter boards and not for the vast majority of our decking. The fasteners we're using for this entire project are actually Timbertech Cortex fasteners. Now these fasteners are incredible because it not only provides the strongest hold possible for these deck boards, but it also comes with a matching cap system, which you'll be seeing in much more detail later on in the video. As I install our second mitered board, just know that I'm installing it the same exact way with a 45-degree cut, but I don't cut this board to length yet, and you'll see why I do this momentarily. Now that our first mitered corner is accounted for, I can start bringing in more decking. Now one of the most important things when installing decking is to make sure we have proper spacing all the way across the boards. There are plenty of deck spacers to choose from, but I enjoy using these Wise Guides deck spacers. Now they come in different colors, which also constitutes different thicknesses, and the thicknesses that we're using on this project are 1/4 inch thick. Spacing is an extremely important step, especially when considering how important it is to the visual eye. You want to make sure that every single one of these boards looks beautiful and looks straight, and making sure you have proper spacing is a key element in that. Plus, we're working with composite decking, which does tend to flex a bit more when in direct sunlight, so you want to guarantee yourself that you have perfectly straight boards with the spacers. One other key item to note is that I'm installing every other bay except for the ends. The ends I'm doing both, but I am skipping rows due to the speed of installation. Now I am coming back to all these joists later on, but with a chalk line, which does help the ease of installation because I know exactly where the dead center of the joist is without even looking underneath the decking. Before we do those rows, I do take a chalk line and strike a line at our first termination point of this deck. If you watched part 1 of this deck makeover, this is exactly where our doubled up joists are located. In order to get the best and straightest line possible, I'm using an existing deck board and using that as a guide for my circular saw. Once that board is pinned down with a couple clamps on both sides, I can then run my circular saw all the way across the deck in order to get a perfectly straight cut all the way down. I remove all of the excess cutoff and make my way over to installing the next perimeter board. As I install this next board, just note that these two boards can butt up right next to each other, butt to butt, as long as these boards weren't heated up previously due to the sun. But the one thing you do want to think about sometimes is to make sure you actually have these positions clamped down so it avoids movement. The first screw I placed in this location, it actually moved on me slightly, so I removed the screw and then repositioned the board with a clamp. Because these divider boards are actually going underneath our siding, it's hard to get a measurement with just one measurement, which is why I'm doing two measurements. One is just a foot out from the back side of the flashing, and the other is just the remainder of the length. Then just add them together and you have a perfect board length. I do suggest burning a full ½ inch at this location though, because you do have to account for the 1/4 inch at this location, as well as some wiggle room on the back side. This is a divider board, so I am installing fasteners every 6 inches to make sure we have a properly secured board all the way down, since this is going to be such a high trafficked area. If you haven't noticed already, I did add some ladder blocking at this location just to make sure we have a beefed up location. Now this is every 16 inches on center on both sides of our doubled up divider board. This is the only area where I added more blocking, so I just wanted to make sure we addressed it before we move on to more decking. With the center divider board taken care of, we can now move on to our second large bay of decking. We're installing this decking in the same fashion that we did previously on our first large area, so since we already covered the details of installation, let's talk about our sponsor this week, Timbertech. They provided all the decking material for this entire project, and I couldn't imagine a better sponsor for this video series. This is their landmark collection and the color is Castlegate. Now, I've worked with Timbertech for years, even before they were ever a sponsor. They have an amazing array of colors and products to choose from, and this product has a 50-year fade and stain warranty, which is truly remarkable and bar none is better than anything that I've found in the industry. There's no wood anywhere within this product, which gives you the best resistance to mold and moisture damage. And if you want to check out their amazing lineup to choose from, I'll make sure and leave a link in the video description below. Now I just cut all the scrap off for our second divider board, but I had to do a plunge cut at this location, which is why I'm using my multi-tool to cut off the small remainder at this location. And this is in order to have a mirrored look at our perimeter board locations. Now this makes more sense when you actually see the whole thing in action in grand scheme fashion, but just know we planned ahead in order to achieve our mirrored look finish that we wanted. I used a speed square and a circular saw to cut off the remainder at this location, and we're finally ready to finish off our perimeter boards with a nice mitered corner finish that matches the adjacent corner that we did at the very beginning. This last side is a bit unique because we don't account for a fascia board due to the fact that we have a small shed right up against this deck. Not a big deal, you just have to keep that in mind when you're installing your framing for this picture frame look. The one thing I had to account for here versus anywhere else is the fact that we did have to work with existing joists and existing joist spaces, and this side actually wasn't a true 90 corner, which means the deck boards that I'm installing now actually have to be cut at a slight angle, which is not a big deal, you just need to make sure you account for that angle before you install these deck boards. As I'm installing these final few deck boards in this section, I wanted to note that I did not install the divider board that's between these two decking sections. That's because this divider board actually has to be slightly adjusted. there was one joist out of this entire area that needed to be planed down significantly in order to have the same level surface as all the other joists, and I showed that in last week's video. But in order to accommodate that thickness difference in that section, I had to get a little creative, which is where this table saw comes into play. I used a plunge method, and with the help of my table saw guide, I was easily able to cut as deep as I needed to, and then place a second cut on the back side in order to remove that section of the decking material quickly and easily. Then all I have to do is slide it into position, and it actually fit the very first time I did this. I seriously cannot believe this worked the very first time, but it really did, and sometimes you just get lucky. I did have to give it a few love taps on one side to make sure it went underneath our siding and over our flashing appropriately, but once we had that taken care of, we could fasten as needed. It did get a little tight in some spots as I'm installing underneath this existing doorway. However, we made it work, and that's what it's all about when working with existing structures. Speaking of existing structures,
so we're over here trying to fit in this last piece of decking. However, we quickly realized they forgot to put the flashing underneath the door sill. So we're gonna put an extra piece of flashing down because that is definitely an important aspect to this area. You always wanna make sure we have a nice continuous bead of flashing all the way down, which is why we're gonna add it to this area, right there.
this drip edge flashing might seem like a little thing, but it's the little things that count, especially when it comes to weather and water intrusion, and I want to make sure and guarantee that we don't have any water intrusion issues later on, decades to come. Now that our drip edge is accounted for, I can take the final thickness measurement of our final board. Now, I did measure ahead of time to guarantee that we didn't have a small 1-2 inch section. I wanted at least a half of a board thickness, and in this case we have 3.5 inches, which is plenty. If we didn't and we had a very small section, that's why we measure ahead of time, because we can always adjust the spacing pattern from 1/4 inch to 3/16 of an inch, which does make a significant difference when factoring in over 24 boards in one specific section. So small, minute spacing differences at the very beginning can have huge effects at the tail end of a project. Just keep that in mind. As I securely fasten the final 2 boards in this entire deck, it really provides a lot of satisfaction looking at how beautiful this entire deck is. But remember, I didn't install all of the fasteners as needed yet. I skipped every other bay in these large sections, but with a string line, you're easily able to figure out exactly where the center point of each joist is, and it makes it much less cumbersome to have straight fastening locations across all the boards, even with caps. This is the true beauty of this fastening system, is because you have matching top caps, which means that every one of these fastening holes will receive one of these amazing caps and make the fastener hole locations nearly invisible unless you're right on top of it. The way these caps come actually speeds up the installation greatly by coming in these small white strips. The reason why this speeds it up so quickly is because the caps are pre-loaded into this system with the appropriate grain direction, and therefore you just need to make sure that you're installing it in the right grain direction. Now, it does still take quite a bit of time. This will still take you hours to do, especially if you're just by yourself, but that's a small price to pay when considering the beauty and the longevity of this deck. We installed hundreds of fasteners on this deck, and you're bound to come across 1 or 2 screws that just did not go in correctly, or you just had to remove, and therefore you have a hole there, but you don't have an appropriate sized hole. Well, an easy way to go about this and to fix it is to just take your drill bit and drill the appropriately sized hole. Then hammer the cap as you would normally do, and it fits near perfectly just like all the others. With all of our caps in place and installed, we can now finally move on to our fascia boards. These fascia boards are only a ½ inch thick as I noted previously, but they're 12 inches wide, which is why we need to cut them down to the appropriate size. Our rim joist is only 7½ inches, and therefore I rip these down accordingly. Where the corners of the deck meet, you'll probably normally see a mitered fascia board. However, I find that the cleanest look that you can get possible is taking this 12-inch long section and cutting it in half, but not quite in half. I'm leaving approximately a 1/16 inch at the very front of this board and cutting all the remainder behind it. My chop saw is set at the appropriate depth, so I know that I'm not going to go too deep, and because this fascia board is a composite material, I'm able to take a heat gun and bend it as needed without it breaking. This provides a really nice crisp edge, and once I let it cool off for a few minutes, all I need to do now is install it. For the fascia boards, we're actually applying a layer of adhesive first. I apply a layer of exterior construction adhesive and press our perfect little corner right into the construction adhesive. Now I do apply fasteners, however, these are the Timbertech top lock fasteners, and the real reason why we're using different fasteners is because this material is only a ½ inch thick. If we use the same Cortex fastener that we did previously, it would basically go straight through the board because those fasteners submerge into the board and the screw head really wouldn't have anything to hold on to. For the next piece of fascia, I rip down a long section of fascia board at 7½ inches and cut it to the appropriate length. Then I apply my construction adhesive to the back side of the board. This makes it a lot more manageable when applying this construction adhesive, especially when considering the fact that it's a lot easier to apply this material to a flat stock surface versus a completely vertical surface. I position the board as needed and then use a couple clamps to hold the board in place while I install the top lock screws. It's important to note at this time that you don't have to leave any type of spacing between each fascia board. They can butt up right next to each other, and I find it provides the best look possible. With these fasteners, you want to space them out about every 12 inches, obviously closer on my small tight-knit corner spot. And even though these screws don't have any caps, you do want to keep in mind they do come in different colors, so no matter what color of decking you choose, you have a fastener to match it. But with that said, we are done with this deck portion of this amazing transformation. Best part about my job is to really see an amazing transformation when it's all said and done. And look at this deck. From what it looked like before to what it is now is truly remarkable and a complete, utter transformation. I can't wait to finish off the remainder of this deck. As you can see, we still need a railing. I want to say a huge and special thank you to Timbertech for sponsoring this collaboration. It's an amazing transformation and one that I'm truly proud to be a part of. And that's what I call one beautiful, sexy beast. Oh yeah.